Cops brutally drag pregnant black woman out of her car, disturbing video. A sudden crash of metal against concrete and the piercing shriek of car tires shattered the late afternoon stillness, puncturing the small-town calm like an alarm bell echoing down empty streets. In that explosive moment, everything shifted. It felt as though an invisible line had been crossed, a fragile piece obliterated by the rough clang of authority colliding with the raw vulnerability of human life. The air itself quivered with tension, and in that charged silence before the first anguished cry tore free from trembling lips, nobody could have predicted the grim course of events soon to unfold. Johnson never expected her routine drive home to become a terrifying test of her resolve. She was just trying to get to her mother's house before dusk. Her mother was elderly, requiring help preparing dinner, and had promised, like she always did, to be there by 6 sharp. She checked her watch as she pulled out of the small grocery store parking lot, placing a protective hand over her rounded belly. The life growing inside her was nearly 6 months along, an unplanned but cherished pregnancy. She felt that ever-present mixture of tenderness and caution any expectant mother experiences. Each movement behind the wheel was a delicate dance, mindful of both her comfort and her unborn child's safety. She had no idea that, in minutes, her world would spin violently on its axis. The first hint that something was wrong came in the form of flashing blue and red lights in her mirror. At first, she assumed it was just a routine traffic stop. Maybe she'd missed a stop sign or rolled too slowly through a yellow light. Her heart pounded a little faster, as it always did when those lights lit up behind her. She'd had these encounters before, usually harmless. A quick check of license and registration, a polite if nerve-wracking request from the officer, followed by a calm exchange. But on this day, as she carefully pulled over to the side of the road, the siren continued blaring aggressively, and the fear in her chest knotted up more tightly than usual. She brought her car to a halt, rolled down the window halfway, and waited. She watched in her mirror as not one, not two, but 3 police cruisers parked haphazardly behind her in an authoritative line. A pit formed in her stomach. Something about the angle of their approach and the quick, brusque movements of the officers told her this was different. Her hand instinctively found the gentle swell of her abdomen, as though trying to shield her unborn child from the unknown. Her thoughts were an anxious swirl. Had there been some kind of emergency in the neighborhood? Was she somehow mistaken for a criminal suspect? No, that was absurd, or so she tried to convince herself. The first officer to approach kept one hand near his holster. He was tall, lean, and wore a pair of reflective sunglasses that obscured his eyes. His jaw was set, and his stance was rigid. Everything about him screamed tension. Before could say a single word, he was snapping a question at her. "License and registration," he barked, voice low and sharp. Blinked. Her voice stuttered as she asked, "Officer, may I know why I'm being pulled over?" The second officer was already flanking the passenger side, peering in through the window with an expression of suspicion. The first officer, presumably in charge, didn't answer her question immediately. Instead, he repeated his demand. The bite in his tone made her jump. License and registration, now. Her breath caught and she nodded quickly, rummaging in the glove compartment for the registration, keeping her movements slow, mindful of the tension thrumming in the air. Then she reached for her purse, located on the passenger seat. She glanced over to the officer watching from that side, hoping to reassure him she was not hiding anything. She extracted her wallet and carefully slid out her ID. Everything felt drawn out, each movement. She handed over the documents, trying her best to remain calm, though her pulse hammered behind her temples. "I wasn't speeding, was I?" she asked quietly. The second officer exchanged a glance with the first, but still, neither offered an explanation. The first officer stepped away from her door, speaking into his radio. Couldn't hear the exact words, only a muffled series of codes. Meanwhile, the second officer continued to stare at her, his gaze flicking down to her belly before rising back to her face. Could almost taste the tension, and her breathing grew shallow. Minutes stretched on, and she felt the dryness in her mouth intensify. She'd heard horror stories, of course, everyone had, but she always told herself these were extremes, the unfortunate tragedies that wouldn't happen to her if she followed protocol. Now dread coiled within her, cold and unrelenting. When the first officer returned, he looked even tenser than before. He shot a look at his fellow officer and said in a controlled, clipped voice, "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle." Swallowed hard, her thoughts went to the baby. She was worried about undue stress, about any potential harm. Rising tension can lead to spikes in blood pressure. She recalled her doctor's warning. Keep stress levels low, especially in the later stages of pregnancy. Yet here she was, heart galloping, breath racing, pulses of anxiety flaring through every nerve. She tried to remain polite, rational. "Officer, could you explain why you need me to step out?" He glared at her. "We have reason to believe this vehicle is stolen. Step out now." The words hit like a punch. This was her car. She'd bought it a year ago, had the papers and everything. Was there some kind of clerical error? "Stolen," she repeated in disbelief, brows furrowing. "This is my car. There must be a misunderstanding." "I can show you." Before she could finish, the officer slammed his palm against the window frame, causing her to recoil. The aggression in his posture unnerved her. "I won't tell you again." Out of the car. Her mind raced. She'd never been in trouble with the law, had no outstanding warrants, nothing that could justify the hostility. She hesitated, trying to gather her wits. Her door was partly blocked by the officer's body. If she opened it, she'd practically bump into him. "I'm pregnant," she managed, voice quivering. "Please, officer, don't handle me roughly." A flicker of something crossed his face. Was it doubt or mere irritation? She couldn't tell. "Step out and we'll handle everything properly," he said, but the tension in his voice did not recede. Slowly unbuckled her, hands shaking. She cracked the door open an inch, leaning back to avoid pushing it into him. She managed to get one foot out, then the other, her midsection awkwardly trying to maneuver around the steering wheel. She almost lost her balance on the curb, and in that moment the second officer grabbed her arm. Hard. "Wait, ow." She gasped, pain shooting up her shoulder as he pulled her upright. She pressed her other hand protectively to her baby bump. The first officer then snatched her documents from the second's hand and stared hard at them. "Johnson," he muttered, "that's the name on the license. Registration is in your name too." He paused, brow furrowing. "We got a call about a stolen vehicle matching this description, plate number nearly identical." "That's what we're responding to." Forced a shaky breath, relief mixing with anger. "So you see, this is my car. I can answer any questions, provide more information, anything you need." Yet he did not let her go. Instead, he glanced around as though searching for something else to justify his suspicion. "Do you have any weapons on you?" She shook her head vigorously. "No, of course not." The officer gestured to the second, who still gripped his arm. "Search for her." Fear ignited in her eyes. "Search me. I'm 6 months pregnant. I haven't done anything wrong." Her protests caught in her throat when she saw the unyielding expressions on their faces. She suspected compliance was her only option to avoid immediate escalation, even if the request made little sense given her condition. She nodded slowly, tears threatening to gather in her eyes. "Turn around," the officer ordered. She did as asked, the grit of the curb beneath her feet. Her pulse hammered. She felt one of them pat around her waist and hips, and a jolt of humiliation coursed through her. A small crowd of onlookers was gathering on the other side of the street, drawn by the flashing lights. She saw them from the corner of her eye. Strangers, some with phones in hand, others just gawking. The wind picked up, brushing hair across her face, and she blinked back tears. If only she could just go home, call her mother, lie down, and forget this terrifying encounter. The pat-down ended, but the second officer's hand remained on her arm. She faced them again. "Please," she murmured, "if we're done, can I go? I'm just trying to get to my mother's place." "They didn't release her." The first officer spoke again, eyes flicking from the ID in his hand to his face. "We're going to need to verify the VIN number inside the car. Just stand to the side, keep your hands where I can see them." The request might have sounded routine if not for the tone of malice dripping from his voice. At this point, the tension was as thick as smoke. The second officer let go of her only to stand behind her, arms folded, looming. His knees wobbled, her breath a trembling thread of fear. She nodded helplessly. "Yes, officer." He ducked into the car, rummaging around the front console, presumably checking for the VIN or any contraband. She bit her lip. The second officer kept glancing at her belly, and she couldn't tell if it was pity or something else in his eyes. She tried to muster some calm, to slow her racing heart. Maybe once they the VIN, they would realize their mistake. But it was never that simple. The moment the first officer re-emerged, he wore a scowl. "Ma'am," he said in a clipped voice, "would you like to explain why you have what appears to be an altered VIN plate on the dash?" Her jaw dropped. "Altered? No, that's not possible. I haven't touched anything. This is the same car I bought from the dealership last year. The VIN was fine." He exchanged a look with his partner, a silent conversation that raised alarm bells in her mind. "So you're denying it's altered?" he demanded. "Of course I am," she insisted, voice shaking. "I don't even know how to do something like that." He moved closer and she backed up a step, heart stuttering. The second officer intervened, grabbing her arm again, wrenching it behind her. She let out a soft cry. "Wait, stop, please." "Ma'am, place your hands behind your back," the first officer said flatly. Panic blasted through her. "But I'm pregnant," she could hardly breathe. The pressure on her arm caused her mind to swirl with terror. Would they handcuff her, throw her to the ground? She had seen enough viral videos of police encounters gone wrong. Her stomach churned with dread. "Stop resisting," he growled. Her mind spun. She wasn't resisting, she was panicking, desperate to protect her unborn child. She needed space, gentleness, something these officers seemed unwilling to provide. She let out a ragged sob, and the second officer, apparently impatient, forced her other arm behind her. Pain soared up her shoulders, and she fought the urge to drop to her knees. "I'm not resisting," she cried, tears streaming now, free and unashamed. "Please, my baby." The first officer cursed under his breath. "This is going to be a problem," he said in a tone of frustration, as if she were a nuisance interfering with his day. "Ma'am, stay still. We're taking you in for questioning." Her world turned upside down at that moment. The helplessness, the fear for her child, and the knowledge that she was outnumbered and at their mercy all crashed down on her. She tried to remain calm, but her composure was in tatters. Everything inside her screamed to run, to escape this brutality, but she had nowhere to go. Even if she could break free, she couldn't outrun them. In the space of mere minutes, her everyday drive home had become a nightmare. That was when she heard a voice from behind the crowd. "Hey, let her go, she's pregnant." She risked a glance and saw a middle-aged black man, phone in hand, filming the entire ordeal. He looked furious, and the onlookers behind him appeared alarmed. A wave of relief and terror washed through her. Relief that someone was bearing witness, terror that the situation might escalate further with more interference. "Get back." One officer shouted at the bystanders, brandishing an arm to keep them away. "We're handling official police business here." The cameras were out now. A young woman stepped forward, phone held high, capturing every second. Some in the crowd were already shouting variations of "she hasn't done anything," or "she's pregnant." Others seemed too shocked to speak at all. The tension hummed like an electric current. In a moment that would soon be replayed countless times on social media, the officers yanked backward, her body twisting at an odd angle. The arch in her back caused her abdomen to protrude even more visibly. She screamed in pain, begging them to be careful, tears flowing. Then, in a horrifying instant, one officer swept her legs out from under her with a harsh movement, presumably to bring her to the ground for handcuffing. She tumbled, her palms scrabbling desperately at the pavement, trying to shield her stomach from the impact. The crowd roared in protest. She felt something inside her abdomen clench with searing discomfort, and she prayed fervently that her baby would be unharmed. Her mind was a white-hot blaze of panic. She coughed, struggling to pull air into her lungs. The smell of asphalt was overwhelming, the grit scraping her cheek as one officer pinned her face against the pavement. She heard screaming, some of it was hers, but she wasn't sure if the rest was from the crowd or an echo in her mind. Everything seemed to happen at once, a maelstrom of noise, pain, and fear. She could hear the officer's harsh breathing close to her ear, the yells of onlookers, the shriek of the sirens still spinning overhead. More officers rushed to the scene, either to form a barrier against the crowd or to assist in the arrest. The onlookers' voices grew louder, outraged pleas turning into angry demands. Phones were thrust forward, capturing every horrifying angle. "This is police brutality," someone yelled, their voice cracking with fury. "She's pregnant, for God's sake." Through tears managed to choke out, "My baby, please, I can't breathe well." Her air felt restricted, panic ballooning. She wondered if she was about to lose consciousness. The officer kneeling on her back only pressed down harder in response to her writhing, as though she was some kind of threat. Darkness fluttered at the edges of her vision, and her mouth tasted of copper. Then with a brutal wrenching motion, they pulled her back upright, arms twisted behind her. She gasped for breath as she was hoisted off the ground. The rough pavement had left dark smears across her clothing. She realized her dress was torn, exposing part of her belly to the cool air. At that sight, some in the crowd gasped, real horror in their eyes. One woman was sobbing openly as she continued to film, her voice shaking as she said something inaudible to her phone. In the chaos, mind grasped for a thread of sanity. She locked eyes with a teenager who stood wide-eyed on the sidewalk, arms hugging her own torso in silent shock. That girl's raw fear and empathy were the last glimpses of humanity saw before she was shoved roughly toward the waiting squad car. She stumbled, nearly falling again. "Stop it, you're hurting her," an onlooker shouted. Another officer stepped forward, gesturing wildly with an arm, pushing the crowd back as though corralling cattle. The officer holding jerked the squad car's back door open. She found herself thrown into the seat with careless force, her legs tangling as she tried to maneuver around her belly. The door slammed behind her. Through the window, she could still see the crowd, their phones lifted, capturing every second. Their collective anger, their shock, felt like a distant wave she couldn't quite touch. She was locked in a bubble of terror, trembling hands pressed against her stomach, tears streaking her cheeks. As the officer slid into the driver's seat, she heard the angry roar of the bystanders grow. People were shouting, refusing to leave the scene quietly. A part of felt relief that there were witnesses, that the truth of her brutal arrest was being documented. Another part of her was terrified. When police felt cornered, they sometimes lashed out more. She was stuck in the back seat, powerless. "Dispatch, we've got one in custody, sending her in," the officer radioed, ignoring the turmoil outside. The second officer climbed into the passenger seat. He glanced back at and sneered, "Shouldn't have resisted." She opened her mouth to protest. Before she could speak, the car jolted forward, accelerating away from the curb. She felt a sharp twinge in her abdomen, fear spiking. She tried to angle herself to sit more comfortably, to protect her unborn child. Her wrists ached from the tight handcuffs. She was drenched in fear, rage, humiliation. How had a simple drive home turned into this horror? The images swirled behind her eyelids, her being pressed face first into the asphalt, the searing pain in her belly, the mocking sneer of the officer, the crowd's terrified shouts. She thought of her mother, expecting her any minute with groceries. She thought of her unborn child, uncertain if the stress and violence had caused any damage. Unable to stop sobbing, pressed her cuffed hands against her belly as best she could, whispering, "It's okay, baby, it's okay," though she wasn't sure if she was speaking to the child or trying to reassure herself. The ride to the station felt interminable. Each bump in the road jostled her, sending pangs of discomfort through her midsection. Her tears had slowed, giving way to a numb, trembling shock. She stared out the window at the passing houses and shops, wondering if the world had always felt this hostile. A sense of betrayal clung to her, a gaping wound in her trust in authority. Yes, she had heard about police brutality. Yes, she had read about racial injustice. But knowing it existed and experiencing it firsthand were two completely different realms of horror. When they finally arrived at the station, the officers pulled into a secure bay. The engine cut off and the door opened. Strong hands reached in to yank her out. She cried out, stumbling to keep her balance. Another officer, she couldn't tell them apart anymore, faces blurring, marched her into the building. The fluorescent lights were harsh, the air stale. A few people in the lobby turned to stare at the sight of a pregnant woman in handcuffs, her clothes disheveled and streaked with dirt. They took her to a holding area with metal benches and caged walls. She sat, knees shaking uncontrollably, tears still pricking her eyes. She wanted to demand her right to a phone call, to a lawyer, to a doctor. She wanted to do so many things. But the words wouldn't come out, trapped behind a wall of shock and fear. She gently stroked her abdomen, praying her baby was unharmed. After what felt like an eternity, a tired-looking desk sergeant approached. He had a clipboard in hand and wore a harried expression. "You got ID on you?" he asked, though her ID had already been taken. He flipped through papers, scowling when he couldn't find what he needed. "What's your name?" "Oh, Johnson," she whispered. He asked a few more routine questions, scribbling down her answers. "You're being brought in for suspicion of vehicle theft, resisting arrest, and assaulting a police officer." Her head jerked up. I didn't assault anyone," she managed. Her voice cracked. "I'm pregnant. I was just trying to comply." He gave her a look filled with either boredom or vague pity. She couldn't tell. He just said, "You'll get your chance to talk. For now, I need your fingerprints." The process was a blur. They uncuffed her just long enough to roll each finger in ink, then her before she could even stretch her arms. She felt dizzy, exhausted. Over and over, she pressed a protective hand over her stomach, as though her touch alone could shield her unborn child from the ugly reality unfolding. In that haze, she heard raised voices at the front of the station. Her name filtered through the sterile hall. "Where is she? That's my daughter. Let me see my daughter right now." That was her mother's voice, high, trembling with rage and worry. At that, heart nearly broke. Her mother was not a woman to be trifled with. She was in her 60s, frail from arthritis and heart issues, but also fiercely protective of her children. Tried to get up, tried to call out to her. But the officer at her side forced her back down onto the bench. Stay put. Please, begged, I need to see my mother. I need a doctor. I don't feel well. There was a tightness in her lower abdomen that worried her, a dull ache she feared might be a contraction or stress reaction. Nurse will check you out soon, the officer muttered, though he sounded uncertain. He glanced away, avoiding her eyes. Maybe he felt a sliver of guilt, or maybe he was just uncomfortable in the presence of so much raw emotion. Moments later, an older woman in a white coat appeared, presumably the station nurse. She looked up and down, her gaze lingering on the smudges of dirt and the tear-streaked cheeks. "Are you in any pain?" she asked, more softly than the officers had spoken. "Yes," whispered, half sobbing. "My stomach, I'm worried about my baby." The nurse pressed her lips together. "Let me see if we can get you out of these cuffs." She turned to an officer. "This is a medical matter. I need to check her vitals properly." The officer frowned but relented. They removed the cuffs and gingerly rubbed her wrists, wincing. The nurse asked her to lie down on a narrow cot in a small side room. Relief washing over her at the chance to straighten her back. She flinched as the nurse lifted her shirt slightly to examine her abdomen. Bruising was already visible near her ribs, dark and tender. "This will hurt a bit, but I need to press here," the nurse said, gently palpating. Winced, tears rolling. "Have you felt the baby move recently?" the nurse asked. Tried to recall, but her mind was so scattered with fear. Maybe I felt a flutter after I was handcuffed. It's all so chaotic." The nurse nodded sympathetically. "I'm not an obstetrician, so I can't do a full evaluation here, but we should get you to a hospital." "This is beyond my scope." His heart soared at that. Yes, a hospital, real doctors, a chance to ensure her child was okay. "Please," she breathed, "I need to see a real doctor." But the officer who had escorted her there stepped in. "We haven't cleared her. She's in custody." The nurse turned on him, eyes flashing. "She's pregnant and showing signs of trauma. You can't just keep her in a cell. She needs a proper checkup." "Don't you have protocols for this?" "We have protocols," he grunted. "Let me talk to the sergeant." Closed her eyes, swallowing panic. She felt desperate, as though she were screaming inside a soundproof room. The nurse patted her hand. "Hang in there, dear. I'll push for you to be seen." Soon she was taken back to the holding area, albeit with her hands cuffed in front this time. Small mercies, she supposed. Her mother's cries rang louder from behind a secured door. "That's her mother," someone muttered. "She's not leaving." Meanwhile, the station buzzed with chaos. Officers hovered around a phone, apparently viewing something. One cursed. "This video's going viral," he snapped. "We're in for it now." Another officer typed furiously on a computer, presumably inputting data about the arrest. His head throbbed. She realized the crowd outside must have uploaded the footage already, footage of the brutal arrest of a pregnant black woman. The video was apparently sparking a firestorm. A swirl of conflicting emotions rose in her chest. A semblance of relief that there might be accountability, but also dread at the prospect of more confrontation. She felt on the brink of a breakdown, and her baby's safety was her paramount concern. She wanted to see her mother, to be comforted. Minutes, maybe hours, dragged by. She wasn't sure. Time had lost meaning. She sat on the bench, arms wrapped around her midsection, exhaustion lulling her into a dazed half-sleep. At some point, an officer she hadn't seen before approached, younger, maybe in his early 20s. He had a kind face compared to the others. He crouched in front of her, balancing on the balls of his feet. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I'm officer. I'm going to see if we can get you to a hospital. He looked over his shoulder, lowering his voice. "I'm sorry about what happened." She gazed at him, uncertain how to respond to an apology that would do nothing to erase the trauma. Still, the softness in his tone gave her a glimmer of hope. She simply nodded, her throat too tight for words. True to his promise, officer managed to arrange for a brief assessment at the local hospital's emergency department. The sergeant was reluctant, muttering about the cost and the risk, but the nurse's insistence and the rapidly spreading public outcry seemed to convince him. So, escorted by two officers, was placed in a separate squad car, her mother's desperate calls echoing in the background. "Where are you taking her?" They didn't allow to accompany them, claiming it was against policy for a civilian to ride in the patrol car. longed to see her mother's face, to feel her arms wrapped around her, but that comfort would have to wait. In the hospital's bright, sterile corridors, she endured stares from patients, nurses, and doctors alike. A pregnant woman in a hospital gown, wrists cuffed to the rail of a gurney, was not a common sight. The emergency doctor who evaluated her was visibly taken aback when he saw the bruises on her arms and ribs. He questioned the officers, but they brushed off his concerns. She was resisting, one of them claimed, tried to focus on the gentle beep of the fetal monitor once the doctor attached her to it. The sound was the first sign of reassurance she'd had since the nightmare began, a whoosh, a steady flutter that indicated her baby's heartbeat was strong. Relief crashed over her like a wave, and she sobbed uncontrollably for a few minutes. The officers looked away, seemingly embarrassed by the rawness of her emotion. The doctor, however, placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You have some bruising, and I want to keep an eye on the baby for a bit," he said softly. "But from what I can tell right now, your child's heartbeat is healthy. I do want to do an ultrasound just to be sure everything's okay." "Thank you," she whispered, tears still coursing down her cheeks. She had never felt so grateful to a complete stranger. While she waited for the ultrasound technician, she heard the officer's radio chatter. The station was apparently in chaos. Protesters had gathered outside. The brutal footage of her arrest had exploded online, sparking outrage across the city and beyond. People were already demonstrating near the police station, demanding justice. His heart twisted with conflicting emotions. A swell of gratitude for the strangers rallying to her defense, combined with fresh fear that the police might retaliate or spin a narrative that she was some kind of aggressor. The ultrasound took place in a small, darkened room. The technician spread cool gel across her stomach and moved the wand carefully. The flickering image of her baby appeared on the screen, tiny arms and legs, a delicate curve of spine. The rapid thrum of the heartbeat was the sweetest sound had ever heard. She cried quietly with relief, ignoring the officers standing at the doorway, guns and badges stark against the bright corridor behind them. "Everything looks normal," the technician said, voice laced with compassion. "No sign of placental damage or fetal distress, at least from what I can see right now." Let out a shaky exhale of gratitude. "Thank you. Thank you so much." They cleaned off the gel and she was returned to the emergency bay. A short while later, the doctor approached again, a clipboard under his arm. He frowned at the officers. "She should be admitted for observation, just to be safe. At least 24 hours, especially after an incident like this." The older officer, an expression of annoyance carved into his features, shook his head. "No can do, Doc. She's under arrest. Once you've cleared her, we're taking her back to the station." His voice trembled with desperation. "Please just let me stay, if there's any risk at all to my baby." "You can see your obgyn later," the officer cut in. "For now, you're going back with us." The doctor's jaw tightened, clearly frustrated. However, short of forcibly stopping the officers, his hands were tied. Medical staff do not have the unilateral power to override police custody, except in life-threatening circumstances. He could only do so much. He gave a sympathetic look, pressing a card into her hand, whispering, "If you need a medical advocate or if you need legal help, call the hospital. We'll connect you with resources." Then he turned to the officer with a forced calm. "She's stable enough to be discharged, but I strongly recommend close monitoring." The officer gave a curt nod. "She'll be monitored." No one believed that hollow promise, least of all, but what choice did she have? They returned her to the station a little after midnight. The crowd of protesters outside had nearly doubled, and the night sky glowed with the flash of camera phones and the red-blue spin of police lights. A cacophony of angry chanting pulsated through the air as the squad car inched toward the back entrance. The weight of the situation was immense, pressing on his chest. She caught glimpses of handwritten signs raised high. "Justice for Stop Police Brutality, Protect Black Mothers." Even from the car's window, she could feel the rage and solidarity pouring from the crowd. Tears welled again, gratitude mixing with sorrow. Once inside, she was placed in a small holding cell. They removed the handcuffs but refused to let her mother in. They refused to let her have a phone call, something about protocol under certain heightened threat circumstances. Slumped on a narrow bunk, hugging herself. The cell was cold, the walls a dull gray that seemed to swallow her in gloom. She wanted nothing more than to lay her head on her own pillow at home, to hold her mother's hand, to let her unborn baby rest in a safe, warm place. Instead, she endured the chill of cinder-block walls and the merciless flicker of fluorescent lights overhead. Her night passed in a series of anxious dozes, her body sore and exhausted, her mind alive with terror. She dozed off only to awaken with a start, reliving the moment the officers threw her to the ground. The memory made her chest tighten, each ragged breath laced with fear. Morning came with no sense of relief. More commotion rattled the station. The protests outside had continued through the night and were swelling by the hour. Lawyers from civil rights organizations and local politicians had begun to gather, demanding her release. The media had arrived in full force, hungry for a statement. The officers flitted about the station, tension etched into their faces. They could no longer pretend this was a routine matter. The arrest had become a national outrage overnight. Eventually, in the late morning, a tall, stern-faced detective came to see her. He introduced himself as detective, his voice gravelly with fatigue. "Ms. Johnson," he began, sitting across from her in a cramped interrogation room, "I'm going to ask you some questions." "Oh?" She stared at him, unblinking. "I want a lawyer," she said, remembering the advice her mother had always stressed. Never give a statement without a lawyer present. He hesitated, clearly aware that this was the standard procedure for someone in her situation. "Normally that's your right, but we need to get some facts straight if we're going to move quickly. This situation is complicated," he admitted. She shook her head, tears threatening again. "Officer, I was just driving home." "This is all a misunderstanding." He sighed, nodding. "From what I've reviewed, the initial call about a stolen vehicle was a mistake. The plate number was off by 1 digit, and the VIN number seems it may have been misread. But we still have the matter of resisting arrest and assaulting an officer." She stared at him in disbelief. "I never assaulted anyone. They dragged me out of my car, forced me to the ground." The detective held up a hand. "I've seen the video, it's not good. Public outcry is intense. The mayor is calling for an immediate investigation." He leaned forward. "I'm trying to figure out how to proceed here. The officers involved claim you struggled violently, that they feared for their safety." Her voice shook with outrage. "I'm 6 months pregnant. Do you really think I could pose a threat to multiple armed officers?" Oh. His gaze fell as though he couldn't hold her stare. "I'm not saying I agree with them," he muttered, "but we have to follow the process. The video evidence clearly shows an excessive use of force." His words were cautious but clung to that phrase, excessive use of force, so at least he recognized it. She repeated, "I want a lawyer, please." He nodded, "I'll arrange it." He paused, adding, "I'm sorry." Oh. It didn't bring her any comfort. The remainder of the day dragged on. Eventually, just after noon, a young black woman in a crisp navy suit arrived. She introduced herself as Sarah from a civil rights legal group that had taken interest in his case. Sarah's presence was a balm, a sense of professional competence that desperately needed. They sat down in the same interrogation room. "I've been briefed on the situation," Sarah said, voice low yet brimming with determination. "We're filing motions for your immediate release. The charges against you are baseless. We're also pushing for you to receive medical and emotional support." She gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "Trust me, you're not alone." Oh. Exhaled, feeling for the first time a stir of hope. Sarah explained the legal steps, a request for release on her own recognizance, a motion to drop the charges, and a call for an independent investigation of police misconduct. They might have to wait for a judge's decision, but given the public pressure, she was optimistic, clung to that optimism like a lifeline. Outside, the protests had become a rallying cry for justice. News trucks lined the streets, and activists used microphones to address the crowd. This incident had touched a nerve, resonating with a larger history of racial violence and injustice in law enforcement. The faces outside the station mirrored anger, grief, and a determined quest for accountability. Still trapped inside, felt a tangle of emotions. Gratitude that so many cared, guilt for the fear she felt at the chaos unfolding, and a renewed sense of shock that she was at the heart of it all. By late afternoon, Sarah returned with a guarded smile. "The judge just ordered your release, no bail. The DA's office is already hinting they might drop the charges." She paused, eyes softening. "You're free to go. But be careful, the media is outside, and they'll want a statement." His knees felt weak. She nodded, tears of relief pooling in her eyes. Sarah handed her a paper bag containing fresh clothes, an oversized sweater, leggings, garments her mother had apparently brought from home. Changed in a bathroom, wincing at each bruise, she'd grown used to the throbbing ache in her ribs. A series of black and blue marks marred her arms, shoulders, and thighs. She ran her hand over her belly, feeling the reassuring movement within. So far, her child seemed all right, which was her only real comfort. Finally, guided by Sarah, she stepped into the station's front lobby, where her mother stood waiting, eyes red from crying. "Oh, baby!" exclaimed, rushing forward, arms wrapping around her daughter. Sobbed, melting into the warmth of her mother's embrace. For several moments, they clung to each other, ignoring the cameras flashing around them. This was the only solace truly needed at that second. Reporters thrust microphones forward, voices overlapping in a chaotic storm of questions. "How do you feel? Were you brutalized by the police? What's your message to the department?" She trembled, pressing closer to her mother. Sarah spoke up, her voice firm yet calm. "Ms. Johnson has just been released. She needs medical rest and the comfort of her family. We will hold a formal press conference at a later time. Right now, we ask you to respect her privacy. Thank you." They pushed through the throng of cameras, arms encircled protectively, from her mother on one side and Sarah on the other. Outside, the roar of the crowd was overwhelming. People chanted her name, cheered, waved signs. Some offered flowers. Others simply raised their fists in solidarity. It was a surreal moment, a wave of compassion that collided with the horror she'd endured. She felt tears slipping down her cheeks again. She managed a wave to the crowd, a gesture of appreciation. She even found the strength to voice a quiet "thank you," though it was swallowed by the clamor. Within minutes, she was ushered into a waiting SUV, her mother climbing in beside her. Someone else, maybe from the legal group, took the driver's seat. Sarah slid into the front passenger side. As soon as the doors shut, the cacophony muffled, slumped into the seat, exhaustion catching up to her in a sudden rush. Her mother stroked her hair softly, voice trembling. "My sweet girl, I was so scared. They wouldn't let me see you, wouldn't tell me anything. Are you okay? How's the baby?" She took a moment, tears in her eyes. "We're okay, Ma, bruised, but the doctors said the baby's heartbeat is fine. I need more checkups, but it could have been worse." Pressed her forehead to her daughter's, a sob catching in her throat. "This has got to change," she whispered. "I've seen this happen to others, but never imagined, oh, my baby." She pulled closer, rocking gently, closed her eyes, letting that motherly warmth wash over her. Sarah turned in her seat. "We'll get you somewhere quiet, away from the media. Then we can plan our next steps, if that's okay with you." Mustered a small nod. "I just want to go home. I want to rest." "That's our plan," Sarah said gently, "but the media is camped out at your house. You might not find the peace you need there just yet. We have a safe location arranged for the short term." It was overwhelming, but had no fight left. She simply agreed, leaning into her mother's support. She glanced out the window, seeing the tail end of the crowd fade into the distance. Her city had turned into a microcosm of a deeper national wound. The knowledge that she'd become a reluctant symbol for protest weighed heavily on her. She was just Johnson, a soon-to-be mother, an ordinary woman with an ordinary life. Now she was caught in the center of a storm. They drove for several minutes, maybe half an hour, couldn't tell. She was drifting in and out of a light doze, pain throbbing in her sides. Eventually, the SUV pulled into a secluded driveway flanked by trees. The house there was modest, tucked away from the main road. Sarah explained that a local activist family had offered the use of their home. They were out of town, but wanted to have a safe place to recover. Exhausted, let her mother and Sarah guide her inside. The living room was cozy, with overstuffed sofas and thick curtains that blocked the world outside. She sank into a sofa, breathing in the scent of pine from the trees outside. The relief of being free from the station, from the handcuffs, from the glaring fluorescent lights, was almost overwhelming. She began to sob quietly, burying her face in her hands. Sat beside her, rubbing her back in gentle circles. "Let it out, honey," she said softly. When the tears subsided, felt the wave of numbness that follows intense emotion. Sarah took a seat across from them, setting down a briefcase. "I hate to push, but we need to talk about the next steps. The sooner we act, the stronger our position. Are you up for discussing this now, or would you prefer to rest first?" She looked up, eyes puffy. She felt she should rest, but she also knew the stakes were high. She felt a sense of urgency. "Let's just get it over with," she said quietly. "I want to hear what's going to happen." Sarah nodded. "All right. We're filing a civil lawsuit against the officers and the department for excessive force, wrongful arrest, and emotional distress. We believe the city will settle, but we can push for a full investigation that may lead to criminal charges against the officers involved. We also want to ensure your medical expenses, present and future, are covered. Therapy, prenatal care, anything you need. Swallowed hard, the words felt distant, heavy. Part of her cringed at the idea that she needed therapy, though she suspected that was true. The mere thought of ever seeing a police cruiser again sent waves of panic through her. She nodded. Yes, I understand. Sarah went on. We'll likely hold a press conference in a few days. We'll prepare a statement for you if you're comfortable speaking. If not, I can speak on your behalf. His mother interjected. She needs to rest. Let the lawyers handle it, at least until she's healed. Ola glanced at her mother, then at Sarah. Maybe I can make a short statement, she said. People deserve to know what really happened. Maybe it will help stop this from happening again. Looked worried, but she nodded. If you feel strong enough. Sarah gave a warm smile. That's brave of you. We'll make sure you're supported. Exhaled, but right now, I'd like to sleep. Of course, Sarah agreed, gathering her papers. I'll be in touch tomorrow. If you need anything, call me. She handed over a card with her phone number in bold print. Then she excused herself, leaving mother and daughter alone in the quiet house, helped to a small guest bedroom. It was clean, with a soft quilt on the bed. The window looked out at a cluster of pines. Sat on the edge of the mattress, wincing at the ache in her ribs, knelt in front of her, tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry this happened to you, baby. I feel like I failed you somehow. I should have been there. Shook her head, tears slipping again. Mom, you couldn't have known. This is bigger than us. It's about a system. Ola pressed her forehead to knee. I wish I could take your pain away. Stroked her mother's hair gently. Just you being here is enough, and I'm so thankful the baby's okay. Ola. They fell silent, the weight of the ordeal settling between them. After a while, stood, helping her daughter under the covers. I'll be right outside if you need me, she murmured. Stay, whispered. She didn't want to be alone. Nodded, slipping off her shoes, and lay carefully beside her daughter, curled into her mother's side, the warmth and the faint smell of home lulling her into a place of fragile peace. She dreamt that night of flashing lights, of hands yanking her out of a car, of the hollow sound of metal scraping pavement. She dreamt of a faceless officer pressing down on her, the weight of his uniform suffocating. Then she'd hear the baby's heartbeat, steady and strong, pulling her back from the brink of terror. She thrashed in her sleep, tears seeping from closed lids, but her mother's presence acted as an anchor. When she jerked awake, panting in the early morning light, was there, whispering soothing words, stroking her hair. You're safe. It's just a dream. I've got you. Ola blinked, disoriented, then realized she wasn't in that cell anymore, nor pinned beneath a knee. She was free as she could be under these circumstances. She let out a shuddering breath, pressing a hand to her belly, feeling a faint kick. Relief swelled inside her. She murmured a soft thank you to no one in particular, maybe to the universe for sparing her child. That morning brought more visitors, close friends, a supportive aunt, a local pastor offering prayers. They came in small groups, determined not to overwhelm her. Each offered a mixture of horror, sympathy, and outrage at what had happened. Did her best to greet them, though exhaustion tugged at every fiber. She told them bits of her story, voice trembling, tears always near the surface. They offered love, comfort, and words of encouragement. Some spoke of joining the protests, of demanding reform. By midday, Sarah arrived again, armed with more information. She informed them that the mayor had released a statement condemning the officers' actions and promising a thorough investigation. The police chief has placed the 3 officers involved on administrative leave, Sarah said. Public pressure is mounting. People are demanding they be fired and charged. Listened, hugging her knees. She felt numb, as though her emotions were splintered. She did want justice. She wanted those officers to face consequences for the terror they inflicted. And yet, she also just wanted to close her eyes and pretend none of it had ever happened. The contradiction tore at her, sat beside her, holding her hand. Justice must be served. We can't let this slide. She nodded slowly. I know, Ma. She looked at Sarah. What do I do now? Just wait. Oh. Sarah's gaze was gentle. Yes, but also keep track of any pain or complications. Keep every medical appointment. Document everything. We'll need all the evidence we can gather. And there's a lot of media attention. If you're ready for a statement, they'll listen. Stomach twisted. She felt a responsibility to speak, to represent the countless others who had faced brutality and had no platform. Yet the prospect of standing before cameras, recounting her trauma, was terrifying. I'll do it, she said finally, but I need a day or two. Sarah nodded, of course. I'll arrange a small press conference at a place where you feel comfortable. We'll keep it controlled. That night, the quiet sanctuary of the borrowed house sheltered from the noise. She sat on the porch with her mother, sipping tea, the hush of the pines allowing her to think. Sunset stained the sky in warm hues, a beauty that seemed incongruous with her bruised body and fractured spirit. She breathed slowly, savoring the moment of calm, her hand resting protectively over the life inside her. A gentle breeze carried the faint echo of distant sirens, or was that just her imagination? She closed her eyes. Every flash of red and blue lights now triggered a bolt of anxiety. She wondered how long it would take to heal from this psychic wound, to trust that a simple drive to her mother's house wouldn't turn into a life-threatening ordeal. Reached over, brushing a lock of hair from her daughter's face. I love you, she said, and I'm so proud of your strength. Managed a small, tearful smile. Love you too, Ma. The next day, Sarah returned with an update. The district attorney had announced that all charges against were officially dropped. They had also opened a formal inquiry into the actions of the officers, citing probable cause for misconduct. The news brought relief, though tempered by the knowledge that accountability could be a long, uncertain process. Meanwhile, the protests hadn't let up. National media outlets had picked up the story, replaying clips of the brutal arrest footage. His name and face were broadcast everywhere. She was being hailed as a new voice in a larger movement. That idea both empowered and terrified her. She had never wanted fame or notoriety, certainly not like this. Eventually, Sarah carefully organized a small press statement in the backyard of the borrowed house. They arranged to let in only a select group of reporters known for fair coverage. The yard wasn't large, but it was peaceful, with a few chairs set up near a line of tall evergreens. Stood with and Sarah beside her. Cameras clicked and whirred, but the atmosphere was much calmer than the mob at the station. Stood behind a small wooden podium, her heart pounding. She glanced down at her notes, written with Sarah's guidance, but in the end she decided to speak from the heart. My name is Johnson, she began, voice trembling. I'm a daughter, a granddaughter, an expectant mother. A few days ago, I was just driving home to help my mother with dinner. That's all. But I was pulled over by the police, accused of having a stolen car, even though it's mine, and then brutally taken to the ground. I was handcuffed, my face pressed into the pavement, while I was screaming that I'm pregnant and begging for them to be careful. Her voice cracked. She paused, tears already blurring her vision. The reporters shifted, somber. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion, placed a steadying hand on Sarah's arm, drew a shaky breath and continued, I feared for my life and for my unborn child. That fear was real, and it was validated by the way they treated me, like I was less than human, like my words and my pain didn't matter. This experience has changed me forever. I'm still in pain, physically and emotionally, and my baby has yet to be born into a world that nearly took me away from it. She saw tears in some of the journalists' eyes and saw them shift uncomfortably. She swallowed, forging on. I stand here today not just for myself, but for every Black woman who has been brutalized, disrespected, or disregarded by the very people sworn to protect us. This isn't just about me. It's about a system that allows suspicion and prejudice to overshadow humanity. No one should be thrown to the ground and treated like a threat for the color of their skin or because of a mistaken license plate number, especially not when pregnant and clearly in distress. Rubbed her back gently, steadied herself, voice growing stronger with each word. I'm grateful for the outpouring of support, and I pray that my ordeal can serve as a catalyst for real change, so that no other mother has to endure this terror. I want accountability for the officers who did this to me, and I want better policies to ensure it never happens again. I'm committed to fighting for those things, for myself, for my baby, and for my community. A wave of quiet emotion swept the gathering. Then she added softly, Thank you for hearing me. I ask for privacy now, so I can heal and focus on the health of my child. I trust my legal counsel to fight for justice. With that, she stepped back, tears slipping down her cheeks. Sarah took over, fielding a few questions, felt her mother's arm around her waist, supporting her as they walked away from the cameras. Each step felt like a slow, tentative stride into the unknown, but at least she was walking under her own power, standing tall despite the bruises, determined to protect her baby and find some measure of peace. In the weeks that followed, the city continued to reel from the aftershocks of the viral video. Official apologies were issued from the police department, the mayor's office, even from some of the officers involved. though many doubted the sincerity of those words. Investigations dragged on. Protests continued, albeit with fewer people as time passed. But the conversation about police accountability and racial bias in law enforcement burned fiercely, reignited by experience. Worked closely with Sarah on the lawsuit, providing statements, medical documents, and emotional testimony. Each session left her drained, forcing her to relive the trauma. But she clung to the knowledge that she was fighting not just for herself, but for something larger. She returned to her own apartment once the media frenzy cooled a bit. Her mother came to stay with her, fussing over her care, cooking nutritious meals, insisting she take it easy. Friends and family showered her with support, everything from prayer circles to offers of baby clothes. Each day her belly grew a bit larger, and she marveled at the miracle of life inside her. The baby gave her a reason to keep going, an anchor of hope that refused to be overshadowed by the brutality she'd endured. As news trickled in, she learned that 2 of the officers might face criminal charges. The third had resigned. The legal process was slow, but at least there were signs of potential accountability, which in so many similar cases never materialized. The city eventually offered a settlement, a substantial sum meant to cover damages and hush some of the outrage. With Sarah's counsel, was willing to accept on the condition that the department enact a series of policy reforms regarding traffic stops, use of force protocols, and mandatory de-escalation training. It was a bold request, and many doubted the department would comply. But amid public pressure and a desire to mitigate public relations damage, the city council approved some of those measures. By her 7th month of pregnancy, had grown more introspective. She often woke up in the middle of the night, heart pounding from nightmares, a ghostly echo of an officer's knee on her back. She'd find herself anxiously checking the hallway, half expecting to see flashing lights. Therapy sessions offered a safe space to unpack these fears, though the healing process was slow and nonlinear. She learned to breathe through panic attacks, to gently reassure herself that she was safe now. The bruises on her body had faded, but those on her spirit lingered. Yet amid the darkness, there was a steady glow of community support. Neighbors held fundraisers for legal fees, even though Sarah's firm covered most costs. Strangers sent letters of encouragement. A local Black-owned coffee shop started a splend, donating proceeds to organizations supporting victims of police brutality. In those gestures found a sense of unity, a belief that even in the face of injustice, people could come together to fight for what was right. When she eventually gave birth to a healthy baby girl, whom she named Hope, it felt like a victory, a testament to resilience and perseverance. Was by her side in the delivery room, tears streaming down her face as she cut the umbilical cord. In that radiant moment, felt an overwhelming surge of love, holding her newborn's tiny body against her chest. She whispered a promise to protect her child, to do whatever it took to ensure she would grow up in a safer, more just world. Of course, that world was far from perfect. Over the next few months, the court battles continued, debates about policing raged on, and's name continued to surface in media discussions about systemic reform. But she clutched baby Hope in her arms, looking into her daughter's wide, curious eyes, and felt a steely resolve. The thought of her child enduring a similar fate ignited a fire within her, a fierce maternal drive to push for change. She eventually sat down with a reporter from a major news outlet, granting an in-depth interview. She recounted her ordeal in detail, tears threatening at points, but also speaking with a steady confidence that had grown in the aftermath of trauma. The story aired nationwide, prompting fresh waves of dialogue about police accountability. Letters poured in again, some hateful, accusing her of stirring trouble, but far more offering gratitude, solidarity, and compassion. During a candlelight vigil on the anniversary of the incident, an event organized to honor survivors of police brutality, stood before a crowd cradling hope against her chest. Candles flickered in the twilight, a sea of tiny flames. Other survivors shared their stories, many horrifyingly similar to hers. They gathered in unity, tears glistening, shoulders trembling, yet they found strength in their shared resolve for justice and change. In a voice that quivered with emotion, addressed the crowd. "A year ago, I never thought I'd be here, speaking to all of you about this. I was just an ordinary person. But then the unimaginable happened, and it turned my world upside down. Yet in the midst of that darkness, I found all of you, people who wouldn't stay silent, people who refused to accept a system that terrorizes instead of protects. And now I stand before you not as a victim, but as a survivor. I hold my daughter in my arms and I see the future she deserves, a future where she can drive freely, where she can trust the very ones sworn to protect her, where she is seen and respected, not profiled and brutalized. The candles fluttered in a gentle breeze, the soft glow illuminating tear-stained faces. A wave of solemn applause rippled through the crowd. Felt her baby stir, a reminder of the new life that had blossomed out of her hardship. And in that moment she understood that her story was a thread in a tapestry far larger than herself, woven together with the narratives of countless others. They were all part of a movement, forging hope from pain, demanding that the world be better, one protest, one lawsuit, one candlelit vigil at a time. Though the road ahead was long and fraught with challenges, found a sense of peace in knowing she was no longer alone in the fight. Her voice joined a chorus of others who refused to be silenced. And as she gazed down at her daughter's tiny features, her soft brown skin, her dark, curious eyes, she felt a swell of determination that pulsed through her entire being. If she could endure the nightmare and rise again, then she would make sure her child and others like her would inherit a reality shaped by empathy, justice, and the unwavering conviction that every life matters. It was a slow, imperfect victory. Some officers were fired, others resigned. A few faced charges, though the outcomes were mixed. Yet reforms took root in the department, new training protocols, stricter oversight, a renewed emphasis on de-escalation. Civil case resulted in a settlement and a public apology from city officials, though no amount of money or words could fully undo the trauma. Still, each step forward was a testament to what could be accomplished when truth was brought to light in communities around their own. In the end, carried her scars but also a gentle sense of triumph. She lived on, raising her daughter with love and resolve, reminding her every day that their family was stronger than what had tried to break them. The horrifying footage of her arrest continued to circulate